He called me just a housewife. Then I bought the company he worked for. My name is Naomi Woods. The first time Victor called me just a housewife, everyone at the table laughed. We were at a company dinner with his coworkers. Glasses clinked, people talked loudly, and the room smelled of expensive food. I smiled politely while Victor wrapped an arm around my shoulder. Naomi doesn't worry about business, he joked. She just takes care of the house. More laughter. I forced a small smile. The truth was very different. Years before our marriage, I had worked as a financial analyst at an investment firm. Numbers, markets, and companies had once been my world. But when Victor's career started growing, we decided I would stay home and raise our daughter. At least, that was what I believed. As the dinner continued, Victor kept telling stories about work, promotions, deals, and future plans. Each time someone asked what I did, Victor answered for me. "She's a housewife," he said proudly. Everyone nodded politely. I stayed quiet. But that night, something about the way he said those words felt different. Not loving, not proud, just dismissive. And somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered a thought I couldn't ignore. Victor Woods had forgotten who I used to be. The night after that dinner, Victor came home late. It wasn't unusual. His company had been pushing hard to close a large deal, and he had been working long hours. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, still talking on his phone. "Yes," he said confidently. "Once the promotion goes through, everything changes." He didn't notice I was standing nearby. "The company needs people like me running things," he continued, "not people who don't understand real business." I froze. Then he laughed softly. "My wife?" he said into the phone. "She's a housewife. She wouldn't understand any of this." The words felt heavier this time. Not a joke, a belief. Victor ended the call and finally noticed me. "Oh," he said casually. "You're still awake." I nodded. "Dinner's in the oven." He walked past me without another word. Later that night, while Victor slept, I sat at the kitchen table thinking about something I hadn't considered in years. Before marriage, I had spent 5 years studying companies and investments. I had once helped my firm predict a merger that shocked the entire market. Back then, people respected my opinion. But somewhere along the way, Victor had started believing something dangerous, that I had forgotten how to think. Over the next few weeks, Victor's confidence grew. His company, Stonebridge Holdings, was preparing for a major expansion. Everyone in the industry was talking about it. Victor believed the promotion was already his. Every evening, he spoke about his future position like it was guaranteed. "I'll finally be part of the executive team," he told me one night while scrolling through his phone. "That's great," I said. Victor nodded proudly. "You know, Naomi, this company is about to become huge." I listened quietly. Then he added something that made me pause. "If things go right, I might even become a shareholder soon." That sentence stayed in my mind long after the conversation ended. Later that night, after Victor fell asleep, I opened my laptop. It had been years since I studied financial reports seriously, but numbers still made sense to me. I searched for Stonebridge Holdings. Their public reports appeared quickly. Revenue looked strong. Expansion plans were ambitious, but something about the numbers didn't feel right. One small detail kept repeating. Debt. Large, quiet debts hidden inside complicated partnerships. I leaned back in my chair. Victor believed the company was rising. But the numbers told a different story. And suddenly, my old instincts started waking up. A few days later, Victor invited me to another company event. This time, it was held at a large hotel downtown. Executives, investors, and employees filled the room. Everyone seemed excited about the company's future. Victor introduced me to several coworkers. "This is Naomi," he said with a smile. "My housewife." Each time he said it, the word sounded sharper. Like a label he enjoyed repeating. At one point, a senior manager asked about my background. Before I could answer, Victor spoke. "She used to work in finance," he said lightly. "But that was a long time ago." The manager laughed. "Well, she picked the right career," he joked. "Staying home is much easier than this business." More laughter. I smiled politely again. But inside, something was slowly changing. Because earlier that day, I had reviewed more financial reports. Stonebridge Holdings looked successful from the outside, but the deeper I looked, the more problems I saw. Hidden risks, weak partnerships, investors quietly reducing their shares. The company wasn't as strong as Victor believed, and for the first time in years, I felt something familiar. Curiosity. The next morning, after Victor left for work, I made an important phone call. The number belonged to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Adrian Cole. He had been a senior analyst at my old firm. Now he ran a small investment company. The phone rang twice before he answered. Adrian speaking. "Hi," I said carefully. "It's Naomi." There was a short pause. Then his voice brightened. "Naomi Bennett? Naomi Woods now, right?" I smiled. "Yes. I haven't heard from you in years," he said. "I know." After a moment, I asked the question that had been growing in my mind. "Have you looked at Stonebridge Holdings recently?" Another pause. "Actually, yes," Adrian said slowly. "Why?" "My husband works there." Adrian laughed lightly. "Well, that explains your interest." Then his tone changed slightly. "That company is complicated." "How so?" I asked. "There are rumors some major investors might sell soon." My heart beat a little faster. "Why would they do that?" "Because," Adrian said quietly, "they think the company is weaker than it looks." After that call, I spent the rest of the day researching. Adrian had given me access to several financial tools my old firm used. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Stonebridge Holdings wasn't collapsing, but it wasn't as strong as people believed. Several early investors were slowly selling their shares, quietly, carefully, without attracting attention. To most people, it looked like normal market movement, but to someone who understood strategy, it meant something else. Opportunity. That evening, Victor came home excited. "The promotion announcement is coming soon," he said. "That's great," I replied. He grinned. "Soon I'll finally have real influence in the company." I nodded politely, but while he spoke about his future, my mind was focused on something else. If enough investors sold their shares, the company's control could change hands. And if someone bought those shares quietly, they could become very powerful inside the company. Victor kept talking about leadership and success, but he never asked what I was doing during the day, because in his mind, I was still just a housewife. And that mistake would soon become very important. Over the next 2 months, my quiet plan began. With Adrian's help, I started investing again. Small purchases at first, then larger ones. But not in my name. Adrian's investment firm handled everything. No connection led back to me. Meanwhile, Victor's career continued rising. He spent more time at work, celebrating his upcoming promotion. One evening during dinner, he said something that made me look up. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Some investors are selling shares lately." "Oh?" I asked. Victor shrugged. "Probably nervous people. They don't understand the company's future." I hid my smile, because those shares were the same ones Adrian had helped me buy. Victor believed those investors were making a mistake. He had no idea who was actually buying them. Later that night, I reviewed the numbers again. The total shares under Adrian's firm had grown steadily. Not enough to control the company. Not yet. But enough to attract attention soon. And when that happened, the board would want to meet their mysterious new investor. Victor still believed he was climbing the company ladder. He didn't realize someone else was quietly building a ladder of their own. 3 months later, Victor finally received the news he had been waiting for: promotion. He walked into the house that evening with a huge smile. "I did it," he said proudly. "That's wonderful," I replied. Victor opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. "I'll be attending my first board meeting next month," he said. "That's a big step." "It's only the beginning," he replied confidently. Then he laughed and added something I would never forget. "Maybe one day I'll even own part of the company." I nodded slowly, because by that moment, something important had already happened. Through Adrian's firm, I had quietly purchased a significant number of shares. Not enough to control everything, but enough to become one of the company's largest private investors. Victor believed he was entering the world of real power, but the truth was far more interesting. When that board meeting happened, The directors would finally meet the mysterious investor who had been buying shares for months. And when that door opened, Victor Woods would see something he never expected. The woman he called just a housewife. Victor's promotion changed everything in our house. He woke up earlier, dressed more sharply, and spoke about work with even greater pride. Every conversation seemed to circle back to Stonebridge Holdings and his new role. "I'll finally be in the room where decisions are made," he said one morning while fixing his tie. "That must feel exciting," I replied. "It does," he said with a grin. "You wouldn't believe the kind of deals we're discussing." I nodded while pouring coffee. Victor continued talking about strategy, investors, and future expansions. He enjoyed explaining things slowly, like a teacher speaking to someone who didn't understand. "You see," he said, "business isn't simple. Not everyone can keep up with it." I smiled politely. Inside, I was thinking about the numbers I had studied the night before. Through Adrian's investment firm, I now controlled a larger share of Stonebridge Holdings than several longtime investors. Quietly, carefully. Victor finished his coffee and grabbed his keys. "Big board meeting next month," he said proudly. "My first one. That's a big moment," I said. Victor smiled confidently. "Yeah," he said. "That's where real power is." I watched him leave the house. And for the first time, I realized something ironic. Victor was finally entering the room where decisions were made, but he had no idea I was already there. Later that afternoon, Adrian called. "I've been reviewing the latest numbers," he said. "You're now one of the largest private investors connected to the company." My heart beat faster. "How noticeable is it?" I asked. "Not obvious yet," Adrian said. "But the board will start asking questions soon." "That's expected." Adrian paused. "You're sure you want to continue?" "Yes." He chuckled softly. "I remember when you predicted the Baxter merger years ago. Everyone doubted you then, too." "That turned out well," I said. "It did," Adrian agreed. We discussed the next steps carefully. Buying more shares too quickly would raise suspicion. Instead, we would continue gradually. Meanwhile, I kept studying Stonebridge's internal weaknesses. Several departments were overspending. A few executives were hiding risky deals. Victor mentioned those deals proudly at dinner, thinking they showed strong leadership. But from an investor's perspective, they looked reckless. A few months of mistakes could shake the entire company. And when investors felt nervous, they sold, which meant one thing: more shares available, more opportunity. When I hung up the phone, I realized how strange life had become. During the day, I packed school lunches and cleaned the house. But behind the scenes, I was slowly building influence inside a company my husband believed he understood completely. 2 weeks before the board meeting, Victor began bringing work home. Papers covered the dining table most evenings. Financial reports, expansion plans, internal memos. He never worried about leaving them where I could see them. After all, I was just a housewife. One night, he pointed to a page filled with numbers. "See this department?" he said. "They're losing money." I studied the report briefly. "That seems risky," I said. Victor laughed. "You wouldn't understand the bigger picture." I nodded quietly, but later that night, after he went to sleep, I reviewed the same report again. Victor was wrong. The department wasn't just losing money, it was hiding losses inside complicated contracts. If the board discovered it too late, the company could face serious financial trouble. I wrote a note for Adrian and sent him the details. Within minutes, he replied, "You're still the best analyst I know." I smiled slightly. Victor believed I had left that part of my life behind. But the truth was simpler. Some skills never disappear. They only wait quietly until someone underestimates them enough to wake them up again. One evening, Victor invited me to a celebration dinner with several executives. He seemed proud to bring me along. "Just don't get bored," he joked. The restaurant was elegant and loud with conversation. Several managers congratulated Victor on his promotion. At one point, someone asked about my background again. Victor answered quickly. "She's been a housewife for years." One executive smiled politely. "That must be relaxing." I nodded. "Yes," I said calmly. Victor raised his glass. "To success," he said. Everyone joined the toast. As the dinner continued, the executives started discussing the company's future. They talked confidently about expansion and new investors. One of them mentioned something interesting. "Strange thing," he said. "Someone has been quietly buying shares lately." Victor shrugged. "Probably a hedge fund." Another manager nodded. "Whoever it is, they're patient." Victor laughed. "Well, they must believe in the company." I kept my face calm while sipping my drink, because the mysterious investor they were discussing was sitting quietly at the same table, listening, watching, and learning even more about the company Victor believed only he understood. A week later, Adrian called with important news. "The board has noticed the share purchases," he said. "That was expected," I replied. "They're curious about the investor behind them. Have they asked questions?" "Yes." I waited. Adrian continued. "They've invited our firm to send a representative to the next board meeting." My heart skipped. "That soon?" "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. For months, the plan had moved quietly in the background. Now it was moving into the open. "Will you attend?" Adrian asked. "Yes," I said. Victor was already planning to attend that meeting as a newly promoted executive. He believed it would be the moment his influence began. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Adrian chuckled softly. "You realize this will be quite a surprise for him." I smiled slightly. "I imagine it will." The night before the board meeting, Victor looked especially confident. He paced around the living room while reviewing his notes. "This meeting could change everything," he said. "I'm sure it will," I replied. Victor glanced at me. "You probably don't realize how important this is." I nodded. "You're probably right." He laughed lightly. "This is real business, high-level decisions." I watched him for a moment. Victor truly believed he was entering a world I couldn't understand. Later that evening, he went to bed early to prepare for the big day. I stayed in the living room with my laptop. Adrian had sent the final documents: investment confirmations, ownership records, legal verification. Everything was ready. Tomorrow, the board would meet their mysterious investor, and Victor Woods would discover something he had never imagined. The woman he dismissed as a housewife had quietly become one of the most powerful people connected to his company. The morning of the board meeting arrived quickly. Victor dressed carefully in his best suit. "This is a big day," he said. "I know," I replied. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. "You don't need to come today," he said. "It'll probably be boring for you." I smiled slightly. "I'll stay busy." Victor nodded and left. I waited 30 minutes before leaving the house. Adrian had arranged everything. When I arrived at the building, his assistant greeted me at the entrance. "Miss Woods," she said politely. She guided me to a quiet office where Adrian waited. "You look calm," he said. "I am." He handed me a folder. "These are the final documents confirming the share ownership." I opened the folder briefly. Months of quiet work had led to this moment. Adrian looked at me with a smile. "Ready?" I nodded. "Yes." Across the building, Victor was already sitting inside the boardroom, preparing for his first executive meeting. He believed the day would mark the beginning of his rise. But the truth was much more interesting, because in just a few minutes, the doors to that boardroom would open. And everything Victor believed about power was about to change. The boardroom doors opened slowly. Adrian walked in first. I followed behind him. The room fell quiet almost instantly. Several executives looked surprised. Victor sat near the center of the long table. At first, he didn't notice me. The board chairman stood and greeted Adrian. "Thank you for joining us." Adrian nodded. "My firm represents the investor who has been purchasing shares." The chairman smiled. "We've been very curious about that." Then Adrian turned slightly toward me. "I'd like to introduce the primary investor." Victor finally looked up. His expression froze. "Naomi?" he said. The room became silent. I stepped forward calmly. "Good morning," I said. The chairman looked confused. "You represent the investor?" "Yes," I replied. Adrian placed the ownership documents on the table. These records confirm that Miss Woods now controls the largest private share group connected to the company. Victor stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. For months, he had believed he understood power. But at that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. The woman he called just a housewife had just walked into the most important room in his company, and the meeting had only just begun. For a moment, No one spoke. Victor's eyes stayed fixed on me, wide with disbelief. The board members looked between us, trying to understand what they were seeing. The chairman cleared his throat. "Miss Woods, you're the investor behind these shares?" "Yes," I answered calmly. Adrian placed several documents on the table. These confirm that Miss Woods now controls the largest private investment block connected to Stonebridge Holdings. Several directors leaned forward to read the papers. Victor finally spoke. "This has to be some kind of mistake." I looked at him. "It isn't." The chairman studied the documents carefully before nodding. "Well," he said slowly, "this changes the structure of our shareholder group significantly." Victor looked stunned. "You can't be serious," he said. Adrian remained calm. "The records have already been verified by legal counsel." Victor turned toward me again. "You've been doing this the entire time?" I held his gaze. "Yes." The silence in the room grew heavier. For years, Victor had believed he understood the world of business. But in that moment, something became painfully clear. The woman he dismissed had quietly built a position of power inside the very company he believed he was rising in. And the meeting had only just begun. The board meeting continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Several directors now looked at me with interest rather than confusion. One of them spoke first. "Miss Woods, what made you interested in investing in our company?" I answered honestly. I studied the company's financial structure and saw both risks and opportunities. Another director nodded. "That's exactly what our investors look for." Victor remained silent beside the table. The chairman leaned forward. "As our largest private investor, your perspective will be valuable." I nodded politely. "I appreciate that." Then I added something important. "However, I also noticed several areas where the company is taking unnecessary risks." Victor looked up sharply. "What risks?" he asked. I opened the folder Adrian had given me. "The expansion contracts signed 3 months ago," I said. Several directors exchanged concerned looks. One of them turned to Victor. "You approved those deals, didn't you?" Victor hesitated. "Yes, but they were strategic investments." I calmly slid another document across the table. "These projections show that those investments could create significant losses within the next year." The room became quiet again. For the first time that morning, Victor didn't look confident. The chairman reviewed the documents carefully. "These projections are concerning," he said. Victor shifted in his seat. "They're exaggerated." I shook my head. "The numbers come directly from your company reports." One of the board members leaned forward. "Victor, why weren't these risks mentioned earlier?" Victor looked uncomfortable. "They weren't serious enough to report." Adrian spoke calmly. "As an investor, Miss Woods felt it was important to highlight them." The chairman nodded slowly. "Transparency is important." Victor's voice became defensive. "So now my wife is giving financial advice to the board?" The room grew quiet again. I met his eyes calmly. "I'm not here as your wife." Adrian spoke again. "Miss Woods is here as a major investor." One of the directors nodded. "And investors deserve to be heard." Victor looked around the table and realized something unsettling. For the first time since he joined the company, he was no longer the most confident person in the room. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. The board reviewed the documents I presented carefully. Several executives asked questions about the investment strategy behind the share purchases. I explained everything clearly. "Stonebridge Holdings has strong potential," I said, "but only if the company corrects its current financial risks." The chairman nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair observation." Victor remained quiet most of the time. He watched me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, confusion, perhaps even regret. Finally, one of the directors asked an unexpected question. "Miss Woods, are you planning to increase your investment?" The room became silent again. I looked around the table before answering. "That depends on the company's future decisions." The chairman leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "with your current shares, you already hold significant influence." Victor looked shocked. Influence?" The chairman nodded. "Yes." Victor slowly realized what that meant. The woman he had dismissed for years now had a voice in the decisions shaping the company he worked for. After the meeting ended, several board members stayed behind to speak with Adrian and me. They asked questions about future investment plans and possible company restructuring. Victor stood near the door, silent. Eventually, he approached me. "I need to understand something," he said quietly. "What is it? How long have you been planning this?" "Several months." Victor shook his head. "All that time, and I had no idea." "You never asked?" I replied calmly. He looked down at the floor. "I thought you stopped caring about business years ago." I smiled slightly. "I never stopped understanding it." Victor exhaled slowly. "I called you just a housewife so many times." "Yes," I said. He looked embarrassed. "I didn't realize." His voice faded. For the first time in years, Victor looked uncertain about his place in the world, because the balance of power he had always believed in had quietly shifted, and he had never noticed it happening. Over the next few weeks, my role in the company continued growing. The board invited Adrian and me to attend several additional meetings. They wanted advice on improving the company's financial structure. Victor still worked there, but things felt different now. Some employees treated me with respect. Others seemed surprised every time they saw me. Victor avoided discussing the situation at home, but one evening he finally spoke. "You're becoming very important in that company," he said. "I'm investing in it," I replied. He nodded slowly. "You could have told me." I looked at him carefully. "Would you have believed me?" Victor didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. He wouldn't have. 3 months later, another opportunity appeared. Several major investors decided to sell their remaining shares. Adrian called me immediately. "This could change everything," he said. "If we purchase those shares, what happens?" I asked. "You become the controlling investor." I thought about the moment carefully. Victor had once joked about owning part of the company. Now, something far bigger was possible. "Let's do it," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian's firm completed the purchases quietly. When the final documents arrived, I stared at them for a long moment. Stonebridge Holdings now had a new majority owner, me. The next board meeting felt very different. When I entered the room, the directors greeted me warmly. The chairman stood and smiled. "Miss Woods, congratulations." Victor sat quietly near the end of the table. The chairman continued, "With the recent share purchases, you are now the majority owner of Stonebridge Holdings." Several directors applauded politely. Victor stared at the table. The chairman turned toward me. "We look forward to working with you to guide the company's future." I nodded. "Thank you." Then I added one final thought. "I believe this company can become stronger than ever." The directors agreed. Victor remained silent. The man who once believed he would control this company now worked for the woman he had underestimated. That evening, Victor and I spoke one last time at home. He sat quietly at the kitchen table. "You really bought the company," he said. "Yes." He shook his head slowly. "I spent years trying to climb that ladder." "I know. And you just walked in and bought it?" "It wasn't that simple," I said calmly. Victor looked at me. "I guess I never really understood who you were." I smiled slightly. "Maybe you never tried." He nodded quietly. For a long time, Victor had believed my life was smaller than his, that my world ended at the walls of our home. But sometimes the person standing quietly beside you understands far more than you realize. And when someone underestimates that person long enough, they might one day discover something surprising. The housewife they ignored was never powerless. She was simply waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she truly was.